All right, everyone, how's it going? My name is Azbiel. I'm the Guildmaster of the Guild of Legends, located in the heart of the multiverse. And today, because we didn't finish it up last time, we're continuing our look into the One D&D playtest material for expert classes. We got through the classes themselves and the bulk of the feats, uh, and all of that. We left off right around this point. I think we had just gotten done looking over Polearm Master, kind of comparing that to how Polearm Master works in uh, standard 5e D&D. So we'll be picking up from there. I'll have off screen here. I'll have the D&D Beyond pulled up just so I can reference, because I absolutely don't have all of these feats memorized, and even if I did, it's easier to compare the wording and things when you have them actively visible there. But there's not really a ton left in this. I mean, it looks like we're about just beyond halfway through the document, but ultimately, I think a big chunk of this, there's the spell list, which we're going to kind of just skip right over. I don't think there's a ton. There'd be some information to get from that, but not anything super significant. I think because you can't directly compare it to anything since previously uh, spell lists were per class rather than kind of the generalized form that they're in now. The rules glossary is a part that we're going to take a big look into. I think because a lot of these are stuff that we would have probably seen in the previous playtest documents. We will kind of skip over some of those as I see fit. But then there's other things that are new to this one, I'm sure, or probably at the very least I've forgotten from the previous one. So we'll definitely be looking through this section a fair bit, I think. And then let's see here. As we kind of get through that, it looks like that's the end of it. So let's jump back up here to the resilient feat and kind of pick up where we left off. So something that I'm seeing, kind of coming back into this, something I've been seeing with a lot of these, the epic boons obviously were level 20 only. Those were basically the top tier feats, the super the extra superhuman feats, the stuff that goes above and beyond what your character is normally capable of, only available at level 20 because of how powerful they are. We've seen a bunch of level 1 feats, and we've seen a bunch of level 4 feats. But I'm curious to see if in the final product there will be more level based prerequisites beyond those 3 points. I don't remember seeing anything else. I only remember off the top of my head those 3 points 1, 4, and 20. So um, it's kind of an interesting point. Obviously, the first level feats you can pick right away when you make your character, because when you make your character, you get to pick a feat. Um, I believe that is a standard rule in 1D&D, if I'm remembering the previous document correctly. Then the fourth level feats would be the first opportunity you have to get feats under standard leveling after first level. And then level 20, they have every class gets an epic boon at level 20. So it makes sense to include those 3 points, I think, but definitely interested to see if there's anything beyond that. But let's continue with this. I'm in the wrong section. Let me scroll back up here. Resilient. No prerequisites, non-repeatable. It is a 4th level feat. You have developed the resilience to better withstand certain dangers, granting you the following benefits: an ability score increase, choosing one ability in which you lack saving throw proficiency, increase the ability score by 1 to a maximum of 20, and you gain saving throw proficiency with the chosen ability. that is pretty much exactly the way it works. The only thing I can see that seems to be worded really significantly differently is that it says choose one ability in which you lack the saving throw proficiency. Obviously, if you already have the proficiency in the saving throw, there is no point in taking this over a normal ability score increase. But as it is, the wording on the current stock one would let you take it anyway, even though it's pointless. Um, just to get that +1. Um, but yeah, realistically, it functions exactly the same. So, not much interesting to see there. Moving to Ritual Caster, 4th level feat, prerequisite intelligence, wisdom, or charisma 13 plus. That is changed. The stock version of this feat requires intelligence or wisdom specifically. It can't be used with charisma as a basis for the prerequisites, which this absolutely makes sense. Intelligence, wisdom, and charisma are all spell casting based ability scores. Any classes that cast spells use one of those three as their primary ability score typically. So it definitely makes sense to include charisma in that list. Honestly, I have no idea why it didn't previously. It's non-repeatable. And you have studied ritual magic, granting you the following benefits. Interestingly, that's actually worded differently. The stock version of kind of the little blurb ahead of the actual bullet points says you have learned a number of spells that you can cast as rituals. These spells are written in a ritual book, which you must have in hand while casting one of them. So I wonder. It looks like maybe this doesn't actually require a ritual book to do it, but maybe there's something I'm missing here. Like the vast majority of feats previously, increases an ability score, in this case intelligence, wisdom, or charisma, by 1. That absolutely makes sense, again, because those are the spellcasting ability scores. And then you choose 2 first level spells that have the ritual tag from Arcane, Divine, and Primal spell lists. That is slightly different in that it's based on the new spell lists, but goes without saying. Previously, it would have been based on a class spell list, but in One D&D, class spell lists are not really a thing. You always have those 2 spells prepared, and you can cast them with any spell slots you have. The spell's spellcasting ability is increased by this feat. The spellcasting ability is the ability increased by this feat. Okay, that kind of messed with me for a second. I was having a bit of trouble reading that for whatever reason. And quick ritual. With this benefit, you can cast a ritual spell that you have prepared using its regular casting time rather than the extended time for a ritual. Doing so doesn't require a spell slot. Once you cast a spell in this way, you can't use this benefit again until you finish a long rest. That's a cool little thing to throw in. Most characters who are already spellcasters can already do that with their ritual spells if they have the ritual casting feature in their spell casting. But for people taking the ritual caster feat, you normally couldn't do that. The differences I'm seeing here right out the gate, like I mentioned, the spell lists are different, but that again goes without saying. Otherwise, this section pretty much works the same. I think, yeah, 2 first level spells, and the spellcasting ability is based on whatever you take the ability score increase in. which that works really well. In the stock version of this, you would pick a class to be able to choose spells from their spell list, and your spell casting modifier would be based on the class you pick, which is a bit more restrictive. I think in this way you can choose two spells from any of these three spell lists, and you get to choose which of these three ability scores you want to use as your basis for this ritual. On top of that, they have the entirely new quick ritual feature, which I think potentially makes it a lot more useful. If you are in a situation where you desperately need to quickly use one of these ritual spells, you can absolutely do that in their normal casting time, rather than taking the additional time it takes to normally cast a ritual spell. The only thing I'm noticing differently is I'm kind of repeating myself, but the biggest thing I think is that you don't seem to require a ritual book anymore, which in itself is a generally minor thing. The ritual book itself as an item doesn't really come into play a ton in real play, it seems like. Obviously these things depend on your table and your group, but beyond the caster maybe using that as some of the flavor for them casting their spells, it doesn't really get brought up very much. But having that ritual book and having this feat in stock 5e also gave them the ability to transcribe ritual spells into their ritual book to increase the number of spells that this feat would give them. They had to go through with the same process that a wizard would do, which means they had to take time and money to do it and everything like that. But it was still a way for them to expand their repertoire. You don't have that option here, it seems like. With throwing out the book, they also threw out the ability to gain more spells from this. But all in all, it still sounds like a good feat to me. I really like the quick ritual aspect of it. So I would definitely be interested in seeing this being used more regularly because of the added flexibility to it. Moving on from there, we get to Sentinel, a very popular feat, very strong in the right circumstances. It's a 4th level feat, requires proficiency with any martial weapon, and it is non-repeatable. You have mastered techniques to take advantage of every drop in an enemy's guard, gaining the following benefits. An ability score increase, strength or dexterity by 1. It makes sense. Those are your weapon attacking ability scores, typically. There are very few exceptions to that, so it makes sense to have it be limited to those. But it is nice that it does give you that ability score increase. The stock version did not. Guardian. Immediately after a creature within 5 feet of you takes a disengage action or hits a target other than you with an attack, you can make an opportunity attack against that creature. So basically having this feat increases your opportunity attack procs from just people moving away from you to also using the disengage action, which would normally make them able to move away safely, as well as attacking other people. You can see this is where the kind of the feeling of playing a tanky character comes into play. You're able to have a little bit more control in your immediate area and sort of indirectly protect those around you by attacking people who attack them, as long as the person doing the attacking is within your little sphere of influence. Previously, the way that these aspects were worded was that creatures provoke opportunity attacks from you, even if they take the disengage action before leaving your reach. Mechanically, it works out almost the same, but maybe there is something to this new wording that is important. And the other aspect being when a creature within 5 feet of you makes an attack against a target other than you, and that target doesn't have this feat, you can use your reaction to make a melee weapon attack against the attacking creature. So those 2 points that I just read off are both included in this guardian aspect. There's one more bullet point, but one thing I want to get into is the way that this is worded compared to the way the previous versions bullet points are worded. Specifically, this second part about attacking creatures other than you. The way this worked previously in the stock 5e version of this feat, it meant that if you and an ally were next to each other and you both had the Sentinel feat and an enemy was within 5 feet of both of you and attacked either one of you, neither one of you would gain the benefit of this because it says in parentheses, and that target doesn't have this feat. That target referring to the ally, meaning that if an ally is being targeted by an enemy and also has this same feat as you, you're kind of canceling each other out and you lose the ability to attack this creature. I don't know if maybe they threw that in as an attempt at trying to balance it to make it feel like it wouldn't just be a horrible dogpile if a bunch of players with Sentinel ganged up on an enemy who didn't have it, make it to where anytime the enemy attacked someone, they would be taking a hit. But in this new version, they seem to have gotten rid of that restriction, which suggests that maybe they felt like it was an unnecessary restriction. Maybe they felt like it was more confusing than it was worth. I think both of those are kind of fair to say. I've definitely seen people get confused by this. I've seen turns in combat kind of grind to a halt while we try to figure out whether or not someone can attack someone in a situation where multiple players either do or don't have Sentinel. You no longer have to take that in, keep that in mind as a player who's taking this feat. It just makes it a lot easier to use. Maybe it's strong in the way that it's worded here, but I think generally, I think it's for the best to remove that restriction. So, I mean, in some practical playtest, we'll see how it goes. But I think it's written out better than it was. Definitely feels a little bit stronger because it doesn't have that restriction anymore. But I don't think that's necessarily a problem. And the final point on this. Didn't stock 5e Sentinel also include an AOO when the enemy entered your melee range? I think you are thinking of Polearm Master, which I believe has a quirk like that. Stock 5e Sentinel does not include that kind of attack. No. Final point being halt. When you hit a creature with an opportunity attack, the creature's speed becomes 0 for the rest of the turn. This plays into more of that control in your immediate vicinity. If someone tries to run away from you or try to move through your space or does anything that provokes an opportunity attack from you, and you hit them, they can no longer move. So it's really good for keeping people from running away or for holding the line to avoid enemies running past you and focusing on other players or other important targets. And is just in my mind, it's one of the main quirks of the feat. I feel like getting more opportunity attack opportunities is nice, but even just having the halt feature when they leave your range and getting opportunity attack like normal, that would be worth it for me. But yeah, that quirk works the same. It's worded almost exactly the same as the stock 5e version. So yeah, the only real change is that restriction lift and the ability score increase. That at this point, the ability score increase kind of goes without saying. As we mentioned previously, it's put on almost every feat, if not every feat. So not really necessary to mention that every time. But yeah, this curious to see if removing that restriction will make a significant difference in how people play using this feat in the future. If it'll be something that people take more frequently now that they don't have to worry about other people taking it and so on. We're moving on to Sharpshooter, 4th level feat, non-repeatable, and has a proficiency with any martial weapon prerequisite, just like the previous version. Not the previous version, the previous feat. You can make shots that others find impossible, granting you the following benefits. Ability score increase, increasing your dexterity score by 1. Since it's based on ranged weapon attacks, having it just be dexterity makes sense. Though I feel like if you're doing thrown weapons, like javelins and such, you can use strength with those. But you're probably not going to take Sharpshooter for javelins anyway. Probably not. Maybe you would, but yeah, the basis of this is definitely for weapons like the bows and crossbows. Bypass cover. Your ranged attacks with weapons ignore half cover and 3/4 cover. The previous version of that bullet point is your ranged weapon attacks ignore half cover and 3/4 cover. Almost exactly the same wording. They've just kind of changed up. In the previous version, they said ranged weapon attacks. That's kind of the standard wording they use for that kind of thing. Now they're making it your ranged attacks with weapons, which maybe there is a difference to that in One D&D, or maybe it's just a preference on how the wording is nowadays. Firing in melee, being within 5 feet of an enemy doesn't impose disadvantage on your ranged attack rolls with weapons. That was not a quirk in the previous version of Sharpshooter. Previously, that kind of feature only showed up in the crossbow expert feat, which we saw the crossbow expert feats last time we were looking at this, and how that was specifically for crossbow weapons now, so it became less useful for people who weren't using crossbows. So it makes sense to include a version of that quirk elsewhere, I think. All right, let's see here. For some reason, it seems like my stream's chat thing isn't connected. Let's see if hopefully that resolves itself in time. Hopefully there's no other issues with the stream. There doesn't seem to be, as far as I can tell, but we'll see. Let's see here. Where was I? Moving on from there, again, the firing melee is new to this feat, so that's cool to see that since crossbow expert is now more crossbow focused, as you would expect it to be. And finally, you have long shots. Attacking at long range doesn't impose disadvantage on your ranged attack rolls with weapons. That is pretty much the same wording as the previous version of the same feature. On the stock 5e version of Sharpshooter. So the big difference we have here, beyond firing in melee being added, is that they removed the -5 plus 10 quirk to this feature where you could make an attack, choose to make it a choose to take a -5 penalty to the attack roll, but then in doing so giving yourself a +10 to the attack's damage, which was a huge benefit. Generally it was worth doing on most attacks because the -5 penalty generally wasn't going to be significant enough for player characters to make it feel like they were really going to be missing their shots unless they just got a bad roll. So you would often see Sharpshooter being used on most attacks, and I mean, with the way that Stock 5e works, rightfully so, it's just the way the balance of the game worked out, where that -5 penalty wasn't really a big issue. And the +10 damage was a pretty significant benefit as well. Especially if you have it on a character like a fighter, if they're doing at max level 4 attacks a turn, and being at max level, they have some pretty crazy bonuses to their attack rolls. So taking a -5 would be like nothing. Adding 10, assuming all those attacks hit, that's just a flat 40 damage increase across those hits, which adds up pretty quickly. I'm generally in favor of removing that quirk. I feel like it didn't play out very well with the balance of Stock 5e. There's always ways to work around it, but it's easier if the game kind of works with you a little bit more naturally than having to come up with ways to resolve issues built into the game. In general, I think this version of Sharpshooter looks good. It keeps some of some of the big quirks like ignoring cover and disadvantage with long ranged attacks, but also makes your short ranged attacks even better. Make it to where if you want to play strictly with a bow, then you don't ever have to pick up a melee weapon because you wouldn't ever hit disadvantage from being in melee. So that's cool. Moving on from there, we'll hit Shield Master. It's a 4th level feat. Requires shield training, which makes sense. It's a shield feat, and it's non-repeatable. You've trained to use shields not just for protection, but also for offense, granting you the following benefits. Ability score increase of strength by 1. I'm assuming whatever attacks you make with this would be with strength, so that kind of makes sense. And I say that because just kind of, even without getting into the details here, I saw it mentioning attack stuff here. Shield Bash. If you attack a creature within 5 feet of you as part of the attack action and hit with a melee weapon, you can immediately bash the target with your shield if it's equipped, forcing the target to make a strength saving throw against a DC equals to 8, plus your strength modifier, plus your proficiency bonus. On a failed save, you knock the target prone or push it 5 feet away. You can use this benefit only once on each of your turns. Okay, so previously they had something like this. The way it worked was a lot more simple. It was a bonus action, which you could only take if you took the attack action on your turn. It would be a bonus action that would let you use the shove attack. It would let you shove the creature, which that's went into the shove action. That's the wording I was trying to remember. It would let you use the shove action. Rather than that, in this version, they kind of have it as a self-contained action, which is kind of strange and rare to see in One D&D, because most stuff isn't done that way. It seems like most stuff is referring to a different action that's been added, like the jump action or the search action. Instead, this doesn't let you do the shove action, but lets you basically be able to do the same thing the stock 5e shove action would do, but it works based on a strength saving throw against a DC based on your strength and proficiency, which is a little bit different. And we have Interposed Shield. If you are subjected to an effect that allows you to make a dexterity saving throw to take only half damage, you can use your reaction to take no damage if you succeed on the saving throw and are wielding a shield, interposing a shield between yourself and the source of the effect. The previous take on this would let you add your shield's AC bonus to any dexterity saving throw you would make against a spell or other harmful attack that targets only you. This is more broad, so it doesn't have to target only you. It can be anything that makes you make a dexterity saving throw to potentially take half damage. Instead of just getting a better chance of succeeding saving throws, this will work similar to the rogue's evasion. It will give you half damage on a failure, and let's see, hold on. No, not quite. I was getting ahead of myself here. You can use your reaction to take no damage if you succeed. Presumably, if you fail, you still take full damage. So it's like half of evasion. All in all, though, I still feel like this is a weird handling of the shield bash. I feel like shove should still just be an action that you can take. But maybe there's some reason that they felt shove as an action didn't fit in One D&D. I don't fully understand why that would be the case, but who's to say? I do like the fact that it doesn't take your bonus action in doing this. But other than that, I feel like just the succinct wording of the original version works a lot better. This is a lot of wording for one bullet point of a feature, which is generally less than ideal, at least in the mindset of how they seem to be writing One D&D. Moving on from Shield Master to Skulker, it's a 4th level feat, has a prerequisite of Dexterity 13 plus, and has no, it is non-repeatable. Prerequisite is the same. You are expert at slinking through shadows, granting you the following benefits. Dexterity increase of 1, gives you blind sight to 10 feet, which is entirely new to this version of the feature. Fog of War. Exploiting the distractions of battle, you have advantage on any dexterity check stealth you make as part of the hide action during combat. They had a different take on this aspect. This sounds like it's worded to be more generally useful. But it is specifically restricted to combat. And then Sniper. If you make an attack roll while hidden and the roll misses, making the attack roll doesn't end the hidden condition on you. The fact that hidden is a condition now, I think is pretty good. Previously, there was no rule to really what hiding does exactly. It was very vague and ambiguous, and there were generally accepted standards, but the actual rules are pretty light on what that stuff means. I like the fact that this is now a written out condition, which I'm sure we'll see in the rules glossary later on. But this sniper feature, other than the fact that hidden is now a condition, pretty much works the same as in the previous version. The previous version also made it to where dim light doesn't impose disadvantage on perception checks relying on sight. That is no longer here. Instead, you just have blind sight out to 10 feet, which is, I think, you're gaining a lot more than you're losing, I feel like. And they kind of reworked how this part of the feature works. Previously, it would let you hide when you are lightly obscured from the creature from which you are hiding. Normally, being lightly obscured wouldn't be enough to let you take the hide action, but I think the way they've changed this makes it more generally useful to people who are let's see. What am I trying to say here? I feel like a few of these bullet points largely didn't get used in the original version. That is to say, hiding when you're lightly obscured. Generally, a lot of dungeon masters would, when you try to take the hide action, they would consider whether or not you could reasonably hide in this space. The rules for being lightly obscured, heavily obscured, stuff like that didn't really come into play in practical gameplay a lot of the time. Similarly, it's very easy for people to forget that being in dim light imposes disadvantage on perception checks, which the original version of this feat fixed. Kind of provided a solution to that problem. But if that problem never comes up because it's just a forgotten rule, then that part of the feat is not really giving any benefit. So this new reworking of the Skulker feat makes it feel like a feat that people would actually be inclined to take quite a lot. I know if I'm playing a rogue type character, I am definitely getting the Skulker feat. If I want to be sneaky and hiding around, and especially if I'm going to be attacking people from hiding, I am definitely taking the Skulker feat. That is just incredibly useful sounding. All right, moving on from there, we have Speedster, which sounds new, but I would be surprised if this isn't based on some pre-existing feats that have been reworked into something new. It's a 4th level feat, requires dexterity or constitution 13 plus. It is non-repeatable. You possess exceptional speed and stamina, granting you the following benefits. Ability score increase for your dexterity or constitution by 1. You have a speed increase. Your speed increases by 10 feet while you aren't wearing heavy armor. Now, I'm just going to go to another feat in the stock 5e game called Mobile, which increases your speed by 10 feet. The mobile feat didn't have the heavy armor restriction, but this certainly does. You also have dash over difficult terrain. It's a bit wordy for the name of the bullet point, but it is what it is. It's pretty much what it does. When you take the dash action on your turn, difficult terrain doesn't cost you extra movement for the rest of that turn. The mobile feat also, when you use the dash action, difficult terrain doesn't cost you extra movement on that turn. Almost the same wording even, just kind of changed to the kind of One D&D style of things. There is one thing that mobile had that this doesn't, which was when you make a melee attack against a creature, you don't provoke opportunity attacks from that creature for the rest of the turn, whether you hit or not. But that is a very combat-based bullet points. This, just based on the name, is not about combat. It's about being quick. So it makes sense the way that it's written. And honestly, if I think about it, mobile giving that extra bullet points, giving you the dash over difficult terrain, and that speed increase without restriction, that's quite a bit that you're getting in that feat. Um, I know a lot of people would look at it, see the 10-foot movement speed increase, and take it just for that, or see the opportunity attack thing and take it just for that, and just kind of ignore the other points as just like minor bonuses. But the whole package together is all pretty potent. Um, so I can see this being worthwhile still, even with uh, you know, without that third bullet point. I think it's still worthwhile to take. Even with the heavy armor restriction, I don't know why that's necessary. I can see like the idea, the fantasy concept of heavy armor being incredibly heavy, difficult to move in, stuff like that. But there are a lot of people that argue against that for various reasons. Um, and just game mechanics wise, it doesn't seem like that's a necessary restriction, honestly. It just means that certain characters like fighters and paladins, possibly clerics on occasion, the types that wear heavy armor the most, are just going to be locked out of half of this feat, which is just kind of a shame. I feel like, I mean, obviously, not every feat is for every character, but in this case, why wouldn't you be able to be a little bit faster in heavy armor? You know? Uh, it's also interesting that they did change the name. Doesn't really make a difference. I think maybe they just wanted to play into the theming of it being that you're fast rather than, you know, the idea. Mobile also kind of suggests that you're fast, but I think Speedster uh, has the focus on, well, it's in the name, speed. So I don't know. It feels like a better fit to me. But moving on to Spell Sniper, it's a 4th level feat, requires spellcasting or packed magic feature, and it is non-repeatable. The stock 5e version requires the ability to cast at least one spell. Other feats that had that prerequisite in One D&D seem to have been changed to this new wording for spellcasting or the packed magic feature, so that I suppose people who get spells in other ways without specifically the spellcasting or packed magic features won't be able to use the benefits of Spell Sniper. Like Ritual Caster, for example. If you had the Ritual Caster feat previously, that would give you spells, which would give you the ability to cast at least one spell, which means you would meet the prerequisite for Spell Sniper in the stock 5e version, even though you generally probably wouldn't be able to get the benefits of it. Here, it makes a little bit more sense, but, it's a small difference. You have learned techniques to enhance your attacks with certain kinds of spells, gaining the following benefits: ability score increase for intelligence, wisdom, or charisma. Again, leaning to all three of those potential spellcasting abilities. Bypass cover. Your attack rolls for spells ignore half cover and 3/4 cover. Right off the bat, this is sharpshooter, but for spells. And we look at that here. Casting in melee, being within 5 feet of an enemy doesn't impose disadvantage on your attack rolls with spells. And increased range. When you cast a spell that has a range of at least 10 feet and that requires you to make an attack roll, you can increase the spell's range by 60 feet. So, I think that's about as good a way as they could do to mimic the long range thing of ranged weapons in the for spells. The previous version would double your spell's range. So for some spells, that would give you an insane range, and for some spells, it would give you a slightly better range. For spells that would give you like a 10-foot range, it would then become 20, still useful within, kind of that mid-range option for combat, but turning a 10-foot spell into a 70-foot spell would turn it from that mid-range to pretty long range, I would consider, at that point. So depending on the spell, this increased range is either better or worse, because it's not doubling. But I think this works out really well, and I think it makes, as someone who has a particular character build that starts with the acid splash cantrip, I think this is great because it would be a bigger boon to that spell's range. Let's see here. Casting in melee, that is entirely new to the feat. They previously, if you wanted that, you actually, did crossbow expert work on spells in the previous version? Let me check. Yeah, so previously, if you wanted the casting and melee quirk, you had to also take crossbow expert, because in the stock 5e version of crossbow expert, it would work for any ranged weapon or any ranged attack rolls, rather than just ranged attacks with crossbows as it does now. And then ignoring half cover and 3/4 cover for spells, that is the same as one of the bullet points of the original stock 5e version of this feat as well. So I think with the change that they've made to crossbow experts, making it crossbow specific instead of general ranged benefits, I think having the changes to spell sniper and the changes to sharpshooter make a lot of sense. Also, I'm realizing I said acid splash. I must have been thinking of a different spell. I was thinking it was only a 10-foot spell, but it seems I got that aspect wrong. But let's see here. Moving on to Warcaster. We've only got a couple of feats left. I know we've already been at this for an hour, and it feels like it might be kind of dragging on a bit. But we started reading through the feats last time, so I wanted to continue with that this time as well. And I think there's a lot of interesting stuff to see in the changes here, so going through each one makes sense to me. Warcaster. It's a 4th level feat, requires spellcasting or pact magic feature, and it is non-repeatable. You have practiced casting spells in the midst of combat, granting you the following benefits: ability in score increase to one of those 3 spellcasting abilities, and then you have concentration. You have advantage on Constitution saving throws that you make to maintain your concentration. Holy cow. Hold on a second. Have they changed the wording of concentration? Because in Stock 5e, there was a term called a concentration check. You would make a concentration check to maintain concentration. A concentration check was a Constitution saving throw. Why it had a second name specifically for maintaining concentration, I have never understood. I always thought, hey, maybe there's some reason for this, but after several years of playing Stock 5e, I don't think there ever actually was a reason for that wording. And here it seems to suggest that they just refer to it as a Constitution saving throw, which makes so much more sense. Now, actually, hold on. The wording for that bullet point is almost the same in the Stock 5 Warcaster. So if they still in the rules, if they still refer to a concentration check, what's even the point? It's pointless. Come on. It's unnecessarily complicating the rules. You confuse people when you say concentration check, but it's a thing. And what I'm going to say about that is I'm pretty sure it's a thing. Maybe I've just gotten so used to hearing it referred to that I'm mixing it up in my mind. But I feel like that's a thing. And if it's not, someone please do let me know, because if I've been just referring to it that way for one reason or another all this time and have been making the confusion myself, then that's a darn shame. Let me see here. Okay, so I went off on my rant about concentration checks, and actually briefly looking into it, I don't think the book actually refers to it as that, which means that I picked up on that somewhere, and I don't know where. And that's terrible, because I know I've played with people who got confused by that wording, but I was so sure that wording was actually in the rules. That is my bad. But anyway, the concentration bullet point works pretty much the same as the stock 5e version. Beyond that, you have reactive spell. When a creature provokes an opportunity attack from you by moving out of your reach, you can use your reaction to cast a spell at the creature rather than making an opportunity attack. The spell must have a casting time of only one action and must target only that creature. So normally when you would make an opportunity attack, you could make an opportunity attack with a weapon, specifically I think a melee weapon. Here it expands it to using certain spells, or spells with certain restrictions. Mechanically speaking, that works pretty much the same as the stock version. So this feat is more or less unchanged. I was just about to say there was one more point on the stock version. Somatic components can be performed when you have weapons or shield in one or both hands, which is almost exactly the same wording even. So yeah, Warcaster goes on pretty much unchanged. The only actual difference being the ability score increase. And then we have weapon training, 4th level feats, no prerequisite, non-repeatable. You have practiced extensively with a variety of weapons, gaining the following benefits. Ability score increase of strength or dexterity by 1. That previous version actually already had the ability score increase. And you gain martial weapon proficiency. Previously, you would gain proficiency with 4 specific singular weapons that were either simple or martial weapons. Here you just gain proficiency with all martial weapons, which generally I think is a better way to go. There were very few times when a character didn't have simple weapon proficiency already, and I wouldn't be surprised if moving forward they just gave simple weapon proficiency to everybody, as opposed to a small selection of a few simple weapons like they do with, I think, sorcerers and wizards. In general, it's better. If you want to play a wizard who uses a longsword for some reason, get this and you gain martial weapons, and you can do that. You could do that with the previous version as well, but you get more options with this version. All right, let's let me move on here. Like I said, I'm just going to skip over the spell lists. I think there would definitely be some things to pick up on from this stuff, but I don't think it's super interesting to go over because what information there would be to find going through these lists is going to be pretty small stuff. The main interesting thing I'm seeing here is the changing of spell schools on certain spells. I would imagine maybe they made Flaming Sphere a conjuration spell previously or something. That's now evocation, which seems like it makes more sense. Dancing Lights, I think, was evocation. It's now illusion. Interesting to see Thunderwave be transmutation. I would think that would be evocation. Yeah, maybe we'll kind of skim through and look at those changes at least. Because if this is suggesting that these spells were not what they currently are on this list, then that's pretty astonishing. I'm gonna go ahead and yeah, that's wild. How is glibness not? Glibness was a transmutation spell. That is insane. Yeah, so much needed changes on some of the spell schools. Oh, that's interesting. Cure Wounds is no longer necromancy, it's abjuration. Which abjuration makes sense. I feel like this also kind of feeds into the idea of necromancy is evil, though. Let's see. I want to see a resurrection spell. Okay. Revivify is still necromancy. So bringing people back from the dead, even if they're brought to life, is still necromancy, which makes sense. But healing spells like Healing Word and Cure Wounds are now abjuration, which it's a weird one because abjuration I see is defensive, not restorative. But I guess there is room for that to be interpreted differently, as they seem to have done. So yeah, a lot of changing spells that were in just blatantly wrong spell schools, and some changing of schools to things to maybe fit a different idea of what those spells are. All right, definitely more stuff, more interesting stuff that I thought I would see here. Reincarnate is necromancy now. What was it? It was previously transmutation. Oh, I guess because it puts you in a different body, which is probably why they made it transmutation, but it's still bringing a person back to life. So it makes sense to be the same school as all the others. If I wasn't looking at the spell right now, I would have just assumed it was already necromancy. All right. The rules glossary. Armor training. I saw this when it introduced the classes, and I was curious as to why they used this new name. Armor training is the new name for armor proficiency. Any existing rule that involves armor proficiency now applies to armor training. If you wear light, medium, or heavy armor and lack armor training with that type of armor, you have disadvantage on any d20 test that you make that involves strength or dexterity, and you can't cast spells. If you equip a shield and lack armor training with shields, you don't gain the armor class bonus of the shield. I feel like that makes the usage of armor without proficiency, or I guess the usage of armor without the appropriate training more of a detriment than it was previously, because it now gives disadvantage on any d20 test. That is, any d20 roll, basically, that involves strength or dexterity, and fully restricts casting spells. Previously, I think it only did the spells thing. And then shields just straight up just don't give you the bonus, so they're just kind of wasting a hand by holding it. But it doesn't provide any huge drawbacks by using it. So that's interesting. I guess I feel like this shield part makes sense, because if you were just, say you were in a scenario, an encounter in the game, and for one reason or another, maybe an ally dropped their shield and the entire party was retreating, and no one else was able to double back for the shield, but you could pick up the shield and you don't suddenly have huge drawbacks against you just for picking it up. Because I could see someone saying you picking it up as you donning the shield. And that would be room for argument for whether or not you should be getting various drawbacks, like inability to cast spells and stuff like that, just for picking it up. Kind of a niche reason for making that change, but I feel like stuff like that, that just being one possibility that would make this wording a benefit. But yeah, I think giving more incentive to use the right type of armor makes sense. I don't think I didn't really ever see it, but I could see someone in stock 5e wearing armor of the wrong sort, because it doesn't provide huge drawbacks unless you're a spellcaster. Ability checks, I'm sure we already saw. Arson's tools, I remember. Attack action, I think we already saw. Well, let's check. When you take the attack action, you can make one attack with a weapon or an unarmed strike. Equipping weapons, you can equip or unequip one weapon before or after any attack you make as part of this action, even if the attack is with an unarmed strike. So you could basically switch from unarmed to wielding a weapon or the other way around, basically once per attack, it seems like. Or maybe it's once per action. You can equip or unequip one weapon before or after any attack you make as part of this action. Okay, so I would assume that's once per action. So you don't necessarily have to have your sword in hand the second you go to attack, but as part of the action, you could draw your sword. But then even if you have the ability to attack more than once, you wouldn't be able to then stow your sword and continue attacking empty-handed. Because you can presumably only do it once per action. If you move on your turn, you can use some or all of the movement to move between the attacks of this action if you have a feature such as extra attack that gives you more than one attack as part of the attack action. The attack roll is one of 3 types of d20 tests. This Unearthed Arcana article uses the rules for the attack rolls and critical hits found in the 2014 Player's Handbook. That's interesting. I guess because they want to test these aspects independent of the previous released testing materials. But honestly, a lot of people testing expert classes are probably going to test expert classes alongside the character origins playtest. which has rules about critical hits, I believe. Like, I think that was a big thing that people were discussing, if I'm remembering correctly. Arcane spells, we saw Bark Skin spell. Okay, so they have some actual changes to spells. So let me bring up the Barkskin spell, second level transmutation spell of the primal spell list. Other than the spell list, that's the same so far. Bonus action, down from an action. It's touch, same components. And it is concentration up to 1 hour. You touch one willing creature to protect it with regenerating bark. Until the spell ends, the target's skin assumes a bark-like appearance, and at the start of each of the target's turns, the target gains a number of temporary hit points equal to your spellcasting ability modifier plus your proficiency bonus. The previous version of the spell set the target's AC at 16. Or it set the target's minimum AC to 16, regardless of armor. So if the person previously was wearing, say they had leather armor and they had a +2 dexterity, giving them 13 AC, this would bump them up to 16 regardless. If they had no armor, if you targeted just a plain commoner who had an AC of 10, hit them with this, their AC becomes 16. Only goes up from there if they then have something else that increases their AC beyond what it would normally be. And beyond that 16. So this giving temporary hit points every turn is pretty potent. And I think that is a more enticing benefit than increasing the AC to 16. And it has an upcast that lets you target more creatures. That's a cool take on the spell. I think that is going to be a more used version of the spell than the stock 5e version. I think that's good work. All right. Blind sight. I'm going to try to bring up the relevant things to compare this stuff to. If you have blind sight, you can effectively see within a specific range without relying on physical sight. Within that range, you can effectively see anything that isn't behind total cover, even if you're blinded or in darkness. Moreover, you can effectively see a hidden or invisible creature in that range. All right, so I think that's a good breakdown of how this works. It mechanically tells you exactly what you need to know. The stock 5e version, kind of like the first sentence here, this bit was pretty much the same. Then they go on to explain what types of things would have this, which is unnecessary in a part of it that should be about rules. Actually, I guess yeah, I don't know why it would be necessary to explain what types of creatures would have these when these stat blocks would typically tell you that, and that would be a good indicator of what types of creatures have this. All right, so yeah, the previous blind sight didn't go into any mechanics beyond saying it can perceive its surroundings without relying on sight within a specific radius. So the stock 5e version of blind sight is basically this first sentence, which doesn't tell you anything regarding game mechanics at all. It gives you an idea of what this does. And from that, you're able to infer kind of how this should work mechanically, potentially, but it doesn't accurately specifically tell you what this does. And that is a failing on the way that Stock 5e was written for a lot of things besides just blindsight. What they've done here is good. This is how this should have been written from the beginning. All right. Climb speed can be used to move on a vertical surface without expending the extra movement normally associated with climbing. A climb speed can also be used in any situation in which your speed is usable. Some creatures have the spider climb trait, which allows their climb speed to work even on the underside of horizontal surfaces. So climb is specifically for vertical surfaces, and it can be used anywhere you could use your speed. That's gives a little bit more information than the previous version did in the basic rules. Climb speed, let's see. Yeah. The previous version of the climb speed wasn't as poorly written out as they did with some of the stuff regarding senses. The speeds are generally a bit more straightforward, but yeah, here they give some extra information here with basically 2/3 of their little paragraph here. Creature type. I think we already saw creature types in the previous playtest. And I think when we looked at it, there wasn't really anything too interesting to see there. Just basically noting that the creature type is important to certain rules that refer to creature type. So, D20 tests, ability checks, attack rolls, and saving throws. Yeah, pretty much every roll of the D20 in the game. And that is fully just new wording. It's not new wording for something that already existed exactly. It's new wording, or it's a new term to be an umbrella for these three types of roles, which is probably a good thing to have, since there is commonality amongst them. So if there is something that would affect all of them, they don't have to take the time to write out all three of these. Instead, they can just say D20 test. Dash action. Taking the dash action allows you to make a bonus move during the current turn. So dashing, yeah, let's go to actions. The action section here actually didn't have what I was looking for. Let me see if I can find some wording on this, because I want to see if the wording here is any different. Okay, so the wording for stock 5e for dash is, there's a lot more to it right out the gate. Part of it is giving examples, so even if we cut out that, there's still a fair bit more to this, though, I think. The way it works in stock 5e is that when you take the dash action, you gain extra movement for the current turn. This increase equals your speed after applying any modifiers. The way the dash action in One D&D works is it lets you take an extra move during the current turn. And move is something, because it's underlined here, you can tell it's something we're going to see further on. So we'll, you know what, just for the sake of this, let's jump down to move. And we'll go back up to where we were. But I want to see how this relates to how this would work normally. When you move, you can go a distance equal to your speed or less. For example, if you have a speed of 30 feet, you can go up to 30 feet when you move. Difficult terrain can slow you down. You could break up your move using some of its movement before and after any action you take on the same turn. For example, if you have a speed of 30 feet, you could go 10 feet, take an action, then go 20 feet. Moving around other creatures. During your move, you can pass through the space of an ally, an incapacitated creature, a tiny creature, or a creature who is 2 sizes larger or smaller than you. Any creature's space is difficult terrain for you unless that creature is tiny. You can't willingly end your move in a space occupied by another creature. You could also use your speed to climb or swim. Some creatures also have a climb speed or a swim speed. If you use your speed to climb or swim, each foot of movement costs 1 extra foot. For example, if you swim or climb 5 feet, you must spend 10 feet of movement to do so with your speed. If you're swimming or climbing through difficult terrain, that 5 feet of movement costs 15 feet. Special speed. Some creatures have special speeds such as climb speed, a fly speed, or a swim speed. If you have more than one speed, you must choose which one to use each time you make your move. For example, if you have a speed and a climb speed, you can use one of those speeds when you move, not both during the same move. If you make more than one move on a turn and have more than one speed, you can move. Each move can use the same speed or a different one. For example, if you have both a speed and a fly speed and you use your dash and you take the dash action on your turn, you could use your speed for the move and your fly speed for the dash, or vice versa. So in regards to just the dash, I want to talk about movement here in a second, but in regards to just the dash, since you're using a dash to make an extra move action, that already suggests that you can that already suggests that the bonus to your speed, even though it's not using that terminology anymore, the bonus you're getting is based on the move. It's not really an action, but they're kind of treating it like it's an action. So they don't really have to. What am I trying to say here? They don't need to have a sentence describing that the dash increase equals your speed after applying any modifiers, because you would already take that into account based on just the move rules. Now let's go back up to dash real quick so I can properly keep my thoughts where they need to be here. In the stock 5e version, they kind of went on to further explain how changes to your speed change your dash bonus as well. But since they're using the keyword stuff here, that all goes without saying. They don't need to make the dash action 2 paragraphs long, because they can just say what they say here, and anything else would be covered by the rules for move. I've gone past it. Now, since I had read through move, I am struggling to find it. Here it is. I kind of want to go over my thoughts on that. The main thing being breaking up speed. Previously, the way that it worked in stock 5e, the idea was you would kind of focus on percentages in a certain sense, right? So if you used 50% of your walking speed, your base speed, but you also have a fly speed, then you could use the other 50% of your fly speed in that same movement. That gets really complicated, especially when you have different levels of speed. So if you have like 60 feet of fly, 30 of walk, and I don't know, 15 of swim, the math just gets problematic, right? Um, this way, you're kind of more restricted since you can only do one type of speed per move, but it makes it easier to understand how those rulings would work. And, honestly, if we think about it, if I think about it, and I'm someone who can swim well, but I can also run well. If I'm running and then I jump into the water, it's probably going to take me a second of acclimation before I can start moving in the water, right? Similarly, I would imagine if I leap into the air and I have wings that let me fly and I start flying, it might take me a second to really kind of get my bearings in that circumstance. So having that restriction kind of makes sense in a way as well. It's not too crazy, I don't think. Now, speed of 0. I actually didn't read this part, I don't think. If an effect zeroes your speed for a time, any special speed you have is also zeroed for the same duration. For example, if you have a speed and a climb speed, both speeds are zeroed if you're subjected to the grappled condition. Okay, I feel like that should go without saying, but it's probably good that they did say it, because sometimes even stuff that goes without saying, if it's not there, people will try to exploit it. Let me move back up here so I can continue from where Dash left off. Difficult terrain. If a space is difficult terrain, every foot of movement in that space costs 1 extra foot. For example, moving 5 feet through difficult terrain costs 10 feet of movement. Difficult terrain isn't cumulative. Either a space is difficult terrain or it isn't. A space is difficult terrain for a creature if the space contains any of the following. And goes on to provide some solid concrete examples, which it's always good to have examples for these kinds of things. Not always necessary, but it can help. One I think that is pretty especially useful is referring to liquid at certain depths, and then referring to the fact that any deeper than that requires swimming. Yeah, the DM may determine that other things count as difficult terrain based on the examples here. All right. Divine spells already covered in the previous document. Exhausted. Let me go ahead and bring up. First thing I'm noticing, exhausted is marked as a condition. Exhaustion kind of was a condition, but it was kind of a special condition. While you're subjected to the exhausted condition, known in the older books as exhaustion, you experience the following effects. Levels of exhaustion. The condition is cumulative. Each time you receive it, you gain 1 level of exhaustion. You die if your exhaustion level exceeds 10. That is drastically different from how it was previously. Previously, you had 6 levels. Each level had an extra drawback that you would get up to level 6, at which point the drawback was death. D20 rolls affected. When you make a D20 test, you subtract your exhaustion level from the D20 roll. All right, that makes it going up to 10 make more sense, I think. Spell save DC is affected. Subtract your exhaustion level from the spell save DC of any spell you cast. So it makes it easier for people to succeed against your spells by lowering your spell save DC for exhaustion. That is something that we didn't really have any sort of effect for in Stock 5e. There wasn't really anything that would hinder spell saves, short of very particular and specific effects of things like spells or features that creatures or players would have. Typically stuff that would give advantage or disadvantage and stuff like that, but you didn't have anything that really affected the DCs. I think that's interesting. I'm curious to see how that plays out. Ending the condition. Finishing a long rest removes one of your levels of exhaustion. When your exhaustion level reaches 0, you are no longer exhausted. So that's the interesting thing I'm noticing here is there is no risk of death from exhaustion, apparently. Hold on, I missed a whole sentence. You die if your exhaustion level exceeds 10. That is to say if it exceeds 10 though. So you can go up to 10 and be fine. If you hit what would be 11, you're done. I don't know how I completely blanked that out. That's kind of a big point, and I was just going on to say how I didn't see that. But yeah, so you no longer have the kind of complicated thing where you had to refer to a table to see what effects you now had. Instead, it just gets harder to do things the more exhausted you are. And it is still deadly, it just takes longer to get there. And you reduce exhaustion at the same rate. Expertise is a special feature that enhances your use of a particular skill proficiency. If you gain expertise, you gain it in one skill in which you have proficiency. You can never have expertise in the same skill proficiency more than once. When you make an ability check with a skill proficiency in which you have expertise, your proficiency bonus is doubled for that check. Works pretty much mechanically the same as expertise does in Stock 5e, except now it's not referred to, it's referred to in a rules glossary as opposed to on the feature that provides it. This might be for the best. It means that if you have something that would give you a similar benefit, previously you would have things that would give you the ability to double your proficiency bonus, but they couldn't use the terminology for expertise because expertise was not a keyword, it was a specific feature. Now it's a keyword, basically. So things can refer to expertise like they would refer to exhausted or charmed or grappled. They can refer to the keyword, which means that they can save themselves from having to write out the effects on every single thing that gives that effect. And that's for the best. Even if you have to refer to the rules glossary now and then to refresh on what some of these things do, it's, I think, better than having to write out a paragraph or more tacked on to every feature that has that type of effect. Fly speed. A fly speed can be used to move through the air. While you have a fly speed, you can stay aloft until you land, fall, or die. While flying, you fall if you are incapacitated or restrained. If you have the hover trait, you can stay aloft even while incapacitated or restrained. Now, I believe hover is something that they only ever really referred to on monster stat blocks. And I don't remember if they fully went into specifically what it did, or if there was, it might have been one of those situations where they kind of give you a sentence that gives you the idea of what it does. Similar to what we were discussing previously. I could be wrong on that. I've definitely been wrong about various other things as we've been going through here. But I'd be interested to see if they do more with hover, such as possibly providing it through things like magic items and class effects and spells that previously wouldn't give you the hover trait, as it were. Grappled condition. While you are grappled, you experience the following effects. Your speed is 0 and can't change. You have disadvantage on attack rolls against any target other than the grappler. The grappler can drag or carry you, but the grappler suffers the slowed condition while moving, unless you are tiny or 2 or more sizes smaller than the grappler. While grappled, you can make a dexterity or strength saving throw against the grapple's escape DC at the end of each of your turns, ending the condition on yourself on a success. The condition also ends if the grappler is incapacitated or if something moves you outside the grapple's range without using your speed. So that more or less works the same. Previously, to escape, you would have to make a contested check, but grappling isn't based on a contested check anymore. It includes the new slowed condition, which probably reduces your speed by half, if I were to guess. I'm sure once we get there, we'll see. Otherwise, the 2 sizes smaller thing was already there. I don't think the mention of being tiny was a thing previously for stuff like this, but the attacks affected is also an interesting quirk, which makes grappling a more useful thing to do. If you are a tanky character, you could grapple someone and it incentivizes them to focus on attacking you or trying to escape, as opposed to just still being able to attack anyone within their reach like normal. New version of the guidance spell. That is going to be interesting. Guidance is a very popular spell. You see it used a lot by clerics and the like. Let's see how it's different. 0 level, cantrip. That's the same divination. It's both divine and primal, which suggests that druids and rangers and such could get guidance, when I don't think they could previously. I could be wrong on that, but I think previously it was a cleric spell, and maybe certain subclasses could also get it, but again, with these spell lists, these generalized spell lists, a lot more people get access to a lot more spells. Cast in Time is a reaction. Previously, it was an action that... Oh, you know what? They're doing something like they did with Bardic Inspiration, aren't they? In that, rather than it being a preemptive action that you take, it's now a reaction that you take when someone fails to do something. You channel magical insight into the creature who failed the ability check. That creature can roll a d4 and add the number rolled to the check, potentially turning it into a success. Once a creature rolls a die for this spell, that creature can't benefit from the spell again until that creature finishes a long rest. Oh, I know so many DMs are going to love that last little sentence there. Honestly, when I think about it, I don't think DMs even really dislike this spell so much as they dislike the players mentioning, "Oh, I'm giving them guidance," every time someone goes to do an ability, a skill check. But yeah, I think turning into a reaction, it's no longer preemptive. So like in the case of guidance, there's no resource cost really, like there is for Bardic Inspiration. But still, in the same way that I think it's a benefit for Bardic Inspiration being a reactionary as opposed to a preemptive, I think that there's that benefit to this as well. And this way, you only hear about guidance when it needs to be used. You don't hear about it being used on every single check. On top of that, a person can only get it once per long rest. So I think I don't feel like guidance was a broken spell or anything, I do feel like taming it down a little bit is probably a good call. All right. Help action. When you take the help action, you do one of the following: assist ability check. Choose one of your skill proficiencies and one ally who can see or hear you. You give advantage to the next ability check that ally makes with the chosen skill. This benefit expires if the ally doesn't use it before the start of your next turn. To give this assistance, you must be near enough to the ally to assist verbally or physically when the ally makes the check. The DM has final say on whether your assistance is possible. I think that's good wording. Makes it a little bit more clear as to whether or not someone would be able to give a help action. It suggests that verbally helping someone could be enough to help them. Whether that is through things like persuasion and deception and so on, but also, you could be verbally walking someone through picking a lock, and that could be helpful to them. And of course, they finish it off with the DM has final say, which is just a good little bit of information to tack on to some things like this, because otherwise you might have people arguing that something is possible, ignoring the fact that the DM is kind of the arbiter of the rules, generally. As for assisting attack rolls, you momentarily distract an enemy within 5 feet of you, granting advantage on the next attack roll by one of your allies against that enemy. This benefit expires at the start of your next turn. Now, I want to pull up the help action specifically. Yeah, so the wording is different, but the mechanical effect is the same. I know a lot of people got confused as to whether you needed to be within 5 feet of the ally or 5 feet of the enemy, stuff like that. I think I'm sure I've even seen a case of someone thinking you needed to be within 5 feet of both to be able to do the help action. But ultimately, this works the same as it did in Stock 5e. It's just, I think the wording is written out pretty well here. Heroic Inspiration. When you have Heroic Inspiration, also called Inspiration, you can expend it to give yourself advantage on a d20 test. You decide to do so immediately after rolling the d20. I believe we read through a section about Inspiration in the previous document. Yeah, so we're not going to go through that one. Pretty much all the conditions are new, so we'll definitely check this out. While you are hidden, you experience the following effects. Concealed. You aren't affected by any effect that requires its target to be seen. So being hidden means you can't be targeted by things that require line of sight and so on. If you are hidden while you roll initiative, you have advantage on the roll. That, I think, is new. Of course, in Stock 5e, the rules about being hidden are kind of ambiguous anyway. There's only a few quirks, I think, that are actually strictly written out. But yeah, surprise for the initiative advantage seems new, and I think that's really cool. Attacks affected. Attack rolls you have against you have disadvantage, and your attacks have advantage. That's one of the parts that I think was covered in Stock 5e. Ending the condition. The condition ends on you immediately after any of the following occurrences. You make a sound louder than a whisper. An enemy finds you. You make an attack roll. You cast a spell with a verbal component, or you aren't heavily obscured or behind any cover. Laid out all of the circumstances pretty succinctly and specifically at the same time. Again, I really like the conditions that they're adding. I feel like there is a lot of benefit to that, to adding conditions, adding actions, adding keywords as something that is a concept in the game of D&D, because with D&D 5e, the idea of keywords kind of isn't there. And so you have a lot of stuff that is redundant that shouldn't be. Hide action. With the hide action, you try to conceal yourself. To do so, you must make a DC 15 dexterity check stealth while you are heavily obscured or behind 3/4 cover or total cover, and you must be out of any visible enemy's line of sight. That's interesting. Interesting wording, but I think it makes sense. You would think being out of the enemy's line of sight would maybe be enough, but I guess not. If you can see a creature, you can discern whether it can see you. I don't think that's something that was ever strictly said in any stock 5e stuff, but I think it is good that they do. That's honestly how I've always ruled. I've always, at least in some semi-ambiguous way, have always mentioned to players when they're trying to hide whether it seemed like they were successful or not. Obviously, more intelligent creatures might obscure whether or not they are aware of someone, but generally, I would kind of give that to the player so they know if their action is wasted or not. On a successful check, you are hidden. Make note of your check's total, which becomes the DC for a creature to find you with a wisdom check perception. All right. Incapacitated. Let me see about going to bring up conditions real quick. Incapacitated was extremely brief previously. In Stock 5e, it just meant you can't take actions or reactions, and that felt ambiguous to some people because it doesn't refer to bonus actions at all. But I've seen some people suggest that when it refers to actions, that covers actions and bonus actions and so on. So they still have that wording with inactive. You can't take actions or reactions. But they go on to include your concentration is broken. You can't speak. If you are incapacitated when you roll initiative, you have disadvantage on the roll. So incapacitated is a bigger detriment now than it was previously. Influence. A new action called Influence. With the Influence action, you can try to influence another creature to do something you request or demand. So the Influence action is the action that players are taking when they want to make a persuasion check and so on, more or less. This action can be used only on creatures controlled by the DM, and it isn't mind control. It can't force a creature to do something that is counter to the creature's alignment or that is otherwise repugnant to the creature. This action has 3 main parts: attitude, interaction, and a charisma check. There's a lot to this. Let's see here. A creature's attitude determines how a character can influence that creature. Each DM-controlled creature has one of the following attitudes toward player characters. Indifferent. This is the default attitude for DM-controlled creatures. An indifferent creature might help or hinder the party, depending on what the creature sees as most beneficial. A creature's indifference doesn't necessarily make it standoffish or disinterested. Indifferent creatures might be polite and genial, surly and irritable, or anything in between. A successful charisma check is often necessary when the adventurers try to persuade an indifferent creature to do something. Friendly. A friendly creature wants to help the adventurers and wishes for them to succeed. For tasks or actions that require no particular risk, effort, or cost, friendly creatures often help happily. If an element of personal risk is involved, a successful charisma check might be required to convince a friendly creature to take that risk. Hostile. A hostile creature opposes the adventurers and their goals, but doesn't necessarily attack them on sight. The adventurers need to succeed on one or more challenging charisma checks to convince a hostile creature to do anything on the party's behalf. However, the DM might determine that a hostile creature is so ill-disposed toward the characters that no charisma check can sway it, in which case the first check fails automatically and no further influence attempts can be made on the creature unless its attitude shifts. So immediately by adding attitude, they're adding a whole new level of game mechanics that weren't there previously on the part of the DM controlled creatures. And I think what this does well is that it provides some guidelines for a DM. It helps give them some idea of how to handle these circumstances when the players are trying to interact with various NPCs. And it does so by giving you 3 different attitudes to assign to any given NPC based on their attitude towards the player characters. That's great. That's something that 5e has been sorely lacking, is guidelines for DMs, because when DMs are so often told by other DMs and players and by the books especially to kind of figure it out on your own, it's hard to approach, and it feels like the game isn't meant to be learned, which means that people are less likely to try DMing, which is a real shame. Let's see here. Yasuhiro. I think the good DMs, in quotes, had already considered this, but maybe some played by the ruling of the dice. NPC and player attitudes and disposition play a role. Good to see consideration there. Yep, I feel like people who, there are some people who already had this kind of stuff in mind, but for people who are entirely new to D&D 5e or rather to One D&D, and for people who are new to DMing in general, having something to have anything that the books can do, anything the official rules can do to give you more help is a huge boon. And I think this is a good step in the right direction. Moving on from there, we have interaction. When you take the influence action, either roleplay how your character interacts with the creature or describe your character's behavior, focusing on your character's request or demand. If the interaction is specifically suited to the creature's desires and outlook, the DM might grant advantage to your subsequent check or might temporarily shift a hostile creature to an indifferent or an indifferent creature to friendly. Similarly, if the interaction is particularly irksome to the creature, the DM might impose disadvantage on your subsequent check or might temporarily shift a friendly creature to indifferent or an indifferent creature to hostile. Again, I think that adds on to the attitude pretty well. It's also some information for the player side of things, but again, for the case of things like new DMs and stuff like that, I think kind of taking what they've started with attitude and evolving it with the interaction, telling you that you can have these base attitudes, but an NPC doesn't necessarily have to stick to those, at least not permanently. I think that's written out pretty well. This is wild that they took the idea of interactions with NPCs and made a whole influence action based on that course of action. And then finally you have the ability check. To determine whether your request or demand is successful, you make a charisma check, animal handling, deception, intimidation, or persuasion. And by including animal handling in there, suggesting this is open up to not just people type creatures, but also simpler, more primal creatures, things like animals and stuff that are not the most aware and conscious of things like talking and stuff like that, you know. The applicable skill depends on the interaction, with animal handling being reserved for beasts and monstrosities. There you go. Also, each request or demand requires a different check. The creature's attitude determines the DC required to achieve a specific response, as shown in the influence responses table. Okay, so they've got two different responses for two different DCs for each of the three different attitudes. For indifferent, at 10, the creature does as asked as long as no risks or sacrifices are involved. And at 20, the creature accepts a minor risk or sacrifice to do as asked. With friendly at 10, the creature accepts a minor risk or sacrifice to do as asked. And at 20, accepts a significant risk or sacrifice to do as asked. And hostile at 10 offers no help but does no harm. And at a 20, does as asked as long as no risks or sacrifices are involved. So you can kind of see the scale there between no help but no harm, no risk, minor risk, and significant risk across the three different attitudes. So kind of breaking it down, you have attitude being the DM side of things, ability check being the player side of things, and the interaction being a little bit of both. That's cool. I like how they've broken this down and how they've made some game mechanics for this, as opposed to just kind of leaving it up to the players and DMs to figure out on their own. I think that's really nice. I like that. And I think for new players and new DMs, this lays things out in a really solid way to provide a lot of help for that. All right. Invisible as a condition. While you are invisible, you experience the following effects. Unseeable. You can't be seen, so you aren't affected by any effects that requires its target to be seen. Any equipment you are wearing or carrying also can't be seen. Surprise. If you are invisible when you roll initiative, you have advantage on the roll. Attacks affected. Attack rolls against you have disadvantage, and your attack rolls have advantage. So it's similar to hidden, but better. Not really anything too new or interesting to see there. Let's see, jump as an action. That's one that I've been really looking forward to looking into. I remember seeing jump and I remember seeing search come up, and I really wanted to see what both of those were because those were new actions. And so far, what they've done with the new actions, I think, is good. So I remain hopeful. With the jump action, you attempt to leap more than 5 feet. A jump of 5 feet or less is treated as difficult terrain. That's already kind of a new thing. New as far as the stock rules are concerned for stock 5e. When you take this action, your speed must be greater than 0, and you must make a DC 10 strength check, acrobatics, or athletics. So they're opening it up to not just strength, but also dexterity. If you don't move at least 10 feet immediately before this action, you have disadvantage on the check. On a failed check, you leave 5 feet horizontally or vertically. On a successful check, the check's total determines the distance in feet that you can clear horizontally, or half that if you're jumping vertically, rounded down. This jump doesn't expend your movement, but the distance you clear can't exceed your speed. The distance you clear can't exceed your speed. That's already kind of how jumps are treated in stock 5e. The jump not expending your movements, I don't think that's something that was specifically referred to in stock 5e's jumping rules. It's definitely interesting to see here. So you can you could move, up, say you have 30 feet, you could move up to 25 feet, you could do your jump. You can still only go that extra 5 feet, but you could do it. um it's interesting that it doesn't expend your movement. I don't know why I'm so latched on to that, but ultimately I don't think it would make a huge difference either way, since you're still limited by your speed regardless. um yeah, now previously, for determining your jump distance, you didn't have to make a check. It would be based on a flat value. uh I think vertical jumps were based on your strength modifier, and horizontal jumps were based on your strength score. Both of those in feet. So if you had a 20 strength, giving you a +5 modifier, you would get something +5 for your jump height on a high jump, and you would get like 20 for your long jump distance or something like that. This I think this is a pretty good way to do it. I think it works well because people who play D&D generally like rolling dice. So it's something where it's not taking the dice out of the equation by just basing it on flat numbers. And something that you would see a lot if you keep up with various D&D communities is that people would often come to these communities with stories about issues with their characters' jumping capabilities, because the rules would say they can jump this far just fine, but then their DM would make them make a check, and if they don't roll high enough, then something horrible happens to their character because they fail to clear this gap, which is a real shame because it's a miscommunication between the player and the DM as to how this should be ruled. Effectively, it's situations where there's a home rule, a house rule being introduced without bringing it up to people in advance. But again, that's largely because people like to roll dice, and having a thing that you can do that doesn't involve rolling dice, I think just naturally feels wrong to people in D&D. So I think this kind of works out for the best in that regard. But yeah, I think I would be interested to see what other people think about the jump action. In general, I think this is fine. I don't think it'll make a huge difference in how far or how high people can jump. I think it'll open up more characters to being able to make use of jumping, as opposed to just strength-based characters. So, if nothing else, I think including dexterity-based characters in this is a good upgrade. All right, light weapon property. When you take the attack action on your turn and attack with the light weapon in one hand, you can make one extra attack as part of the same action. That extra attack must be made with a different light weapon in the other hand, and you don't add your ability modifier to the extra attack's damage. You can make this extra attack only once on each of your turns. Okay, I need to look at this again. We take the attack action. Okay, attack with a light weapon in one hand. You can make one extra attack as part of the same action. That extra attack must be made with a different light weapon in the other hand, and you don't add your ability modifier to extra attack damage. That works pretty much the same as Stock 5e's light weapon property. You can make this extra attack only once on each of your turns. That's interesting. Oh, because it's not a bonus action anymore. But you can still only do it once. Now I feel like I read something the last time we were looking through this that suggested that you could attack with an offhand weapon that has the light property, even if the main hand weapon isn't. I don't remember what made me think that, but I would be interested in reviewing that afterwards and see how that actually, let me see. It might have been the dual wielder feat. So let's see. Enhanced dual wielding. When you are holding a weapon with a light property in one hand, you can treat a non-light weapon property in your other hand as if it had the light property, provided that weapon lacks two-handed property. Okay, so that's probably what I was thinking. So you still have to have something that has the light property, but for now, but now you could, as an example, use like a rapier and a dagger, even though the rapier doesn't have the light property normally. If you have this feat, you could treat it like it does. And then the fact that you're not using a bonus action. I'm really bad at losing my place here. The fact that you're not using a bonus action to do this is really cool. That opens you up to using bonus actions to do other things. So you could see dual wielding clerics and, you know, dual wielding druids and stuff like that potentially that you wouldn't normally see because they'd be too busy using their bonus actions for their spells. Long rest. Long rest is a period of extended downtime, at least 8 hours long, available to any creature. During a long rest, you sleep for at least 6 hours and perform no more than 2 hours of light activity, such as reading, talking, eating, or standing watch. Benefits of the long rest. When you finish a long rest, you gain the following benefits. Hold on, let me go back to that. Perform no more than 2 hours of light activity, such as reading, talking, eating, or standing watch. There's no mention of 1 hour of spellcasting or anything like that, but I feel like we'll get to that at the interrupting part. All right, so regain all HP, regain all hit dice. You no longer get half of your hit dice when you take a long rest. Instead, you get all of them. So you might be more incentivized to use your hit dice more regularly, since you will get them all back on a long rest instead of just half. HP max restored. If your hit point maximum is reduced, it returns to normal. Ability scores restored. If any of your ability scores were reduced, they return to normal. So ability score reductions and max HP reductions, the spells and features and things that cause those effects are no longer going to need to refer to the fact that they return to normal after a set amount of time or anything, unless it's sooner than a long rest or longer than a long rest, I guess. So because the long rest specifically refers to those things, only things that are outliers to the long rest would need to be mentioned, which means those things can be kept trimmed down, more succinct, easier to approach and read, and it won't feel like you're reading a book anytime you read a spell necessarily. You can't benefit for more than one long rest in a 24-hour period, and you must have at least one hit point at the start of the rest to gain its benefits. Interrupting the rest. If a long rest is interrupted by combat or 1 hour of walking, casting spells, or similar activity, the rest confers no benefit and must be restarted. However, if the rest was at least 1 hour long before the interruption, you gain the benefits of a short rest. Now I think about it, I think long rests were touched on in the previous playtest. It might be different now. I don't remember the breakdown on getting stuff being laid out like this. I could be wrong, but I remember people were talking about the interruption part of a long rest previously. Magic action. It's no longer cast a spell, it's just magic. When you take the magic action, you cast a spell spell that has a casting time of an action, or you use a magic item that requires an action to be activated. If you cast a spell that has a casting time of 1 minute or longer, you must take the magic action on each turn of that casting, and you must maintain concentration while you do so. If your concentration is broken, the spell fails, but you don't expend a spell slot. This is interesting. So what happens if you're casting a spell that takes a bonus action or a reaction? That's not the magic action, but presumably the reason for making this a listed action is so things can refer to it. But because it's only an action or longer, it can only refer to those spells that take an action or longer. I'm curious to see if any of that matters, but not likely to see that anytime soon, I don't think. I think that's something you'd only find out through actual proper playtesting. We already went through move, musical instruments, primal spells. We already looked at that stuff. Ritual casting. If you have a spell prepared that has the ritual tag, you can cast that spell as a ritual. A special feature is no longer required for ritual casting. All the other rules on rituals in the 2014 Player's Handbook still apply. Okay, so everyone who can cast a spell can ritual cast now. So they can cut that part. Basically, they can cut this sentence out of and possibly more. Since they're using some of the rules on rituals from the stock 5e rules, this would probably be extended out a bit further. But for the most part, ritual casting is something that they can refer to now here, as opposed to having it be copied in every spellcaster's class pages. All right, the search action, not as long as the what was it? Influence or interact? Influence, yeah. Not as long as that, but I've been interested in seeing what this does. When you take the search action, you make a wisdom check to discern something that isn't obvious. The search table suggests which skills are applicable when you take this action, depending on what you're trying to detect. Insight for a creature's state of mind, medicine for a creature's ailment, perception for a concealed creature or object, and survival for tracks or food. So this stuff would have been previously broken down on using the skills section in the player's handbook in stock 5e. Having it listed as an action is just a way to more easily find the information, I think, because it might not be as obvious to look through that specific chapter of the book as it is to look through the actions. Short sword, weapon. Short sword is now a simple weapon. I thought they might be doing that when they referred to it previously when we were looking at this document. So they've made it a simple weapon instead of a martial weapon. Presumably, otherwise still works the same. Slowed condition. When you are slowed, you experience the following effects. Limited movement. You must spend 1 extra foot of movement for every foot you move using your speed. Half movement, basically. Mechanically speaking, that's effectively half movement. Attacks affected. Attack rolls against you have advantage. It's easier to hit you because you're slow. And dexterity saves affected. You have disadvantage on dexterity saves. Again, because you're slowed down, it's harder for you to be nimble. Yeah, I think, again, another one of those circumstances where they've made a condition to make other things that would now impose this condition more succinct, less wordy, less redundant overall. Study is an action. When you take the study action, you make an intelligence check to study your memory, a book, a creature, a clue, an object, or another source of knowledge, and call to mind an important piece of information about it. So similar to the search, this is the intelligence-based version of that. The areas of knowledge table suggests which skills are applicable when you take this action, depending on the area of knowledge the intelligence check is about. So Arcana, History, Investigation, Nature, Religion, all the intelligence skills and a variety of subjects that would be relevant to those particular quirks, including creature types, which I like that they've included. And let's see. Yeah, pretty much the same breakdown of creature types to skill checks as I would have expected. So it's cool to see. It's cool to see that they include those examples in this, because I've seen those in other systems, but not in D&D 5e. Swim speed, it's pretty straightforward, and I don't think we need to go over that. Tool proficiency. Let's see if there's anything interesting here. If you have tool proficiency with a tool, you can add your proficiency bonus to any ability check you make that uses that tool. If you have proficiency in the skill that's also used with that check, you have advantage on the check too. This means you can benefit from both skill proficiency and tool proficiency on the same ability check. That's something that I saw somewhere. I don't remember if it's something I saw in the previous playtest or if I saw it somewhere before that, but that's a rule I've started using more regularly that I don't think is in stock 5e. If it is, it's one that is easily overlooked and not often used. So it's cool to see that it is mentioned here. Teleportation. Interesting that they have a thing about teleportation. Teleportation is a special kind of magical transportation. If you teleport, you disappear and reappear elsewhere instantly without moving through the intervening space. This transportation doesn't expend movement unless a rule tells you otherwise, and teleportation never provokes opportunity attacks. I think that's an important one to mention. When you teleport, all the equipment you are wearing and carrying teleports with you. If you are touching another creature when you teleport, that creature doesn't teleport with you, unless the teleportation effect says otherwise. If the destination space of your teleportation is occupied by another creature or blocked by a solid obstacle, you instead appear in the nearest unoccupied space of your choice. The destination of the teleportation effect tells you if you must see the teleportation's destination. So good breakdown on teleportation. Probably something that they can refer to in various spells and things. I think that's pretty good. We're going back into senses, so I want to bring up that section on D&D Beyond real quick, like we did with Blind Sight, because I think it's going to show that this is probably written out better than the senses section of the stock 5e rules. All right, a creature with tremor sense can pinpoint the location of creatures and moving objects within a specific range, provided that the creature with tremor sense and anything it's detecting are both in contact with the same surface, such as the ground, a wall, or a ceiling, or the same liquid. Tremor sense can't detect creatures or objects in the air, and tremor sense doesn't count as a form of sight. Yeah, so that gives you a little bit more specific idea of what it can do. Previously, it said that they can... Let me check here. I don't know if it's just the formatting or if this is more wordy, but it looks like this has a bit more to it. The wording on the similar parts are more or less the same. Detect and pinpoint, the origin, in contact with the same ground or substance. Can't detect flying or incorporeal creatures. That goes without saying because they wouldn't be within in contact. And then it goes on to say, many burrowing creatures such as Ankh-eggs have this special sense. Again, not super necessary to include that in a breakdown of the rule. So it's already the stock 5e version of Tremor Sense was written out a little bit better than Blindsight was. I think these do still leave a little bit to be desired in how they're written out, but this does provide a little bit more specific detail than the stock version did, just a little bit on how it works. All right, Unarmed Strike. I'm pretty sure we already saw this in the original version. I remember people were talking about it because it includes the grapple and shove rules there. So we're not going to go into Unarmed Strike, but what that does mean is that we've hit the end of the document. Overall, I think my favorite thing about this so far is we're seeing a lot of these keywords added, a lot of actions added that kind of give more idea of how you can use certain skills. And things like the influence action, which I think is huge. It's a lot to read, but I think it gives a lot of useful information for both veteran DMs as well as especially new DMs. I think it's useful to everyone, but I think new people to the game will get a lot of use out of this because of how big a part of the game this really is generally. I already kind of gave all of my ideas on what I thought about most of the feats and the classes themselves. But the feats only continued to generally look good to me. I feel like most of them that were changed from stock 5e were changed for the better. There were some interesting things that kind of caught me up that I feel like were little quirks and changes that didn't feel super necessary or felt like a step in the wrong direction. But generally speaking, I think that One D&D is still shaping up to be something really interesting, really good for the game. And I am eager to see, now that I've fully gone through the document, I'm eager to see what other people are saying about the expert classes. That said, we're gonna go ahead and call an end to this stream. However, I might be jumping on with a friend in Final Fantasy here in just a little bit. I'm going to see if they're still looking for someone to join them. If they are, then maybe I'll jump into Final Fantasy 14 and do some tanking for them. But that'll take a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fully end this stream so I don't have to deal with editing the VOD later on and breaking it up into 2 streams potentially. Everyone who's popped in, thank you for coming by. Those of you who jumped into the discussion, I definitely appreciate you guys doing that. It's with this kind of thing, it's always great to hear what other people are thinking as well and bounce some ideas off. And everyone else who's passed through, who's followed, and all of that good stuff, I appreciate you guys absolutely. And we'll see you next time, possibly in just a little bit here. But in the meantime, we'll see you next time and have a good one.